Boku no Pico isn't something you can avoid as an avid anime watcher. Being among the 3 highest rated series of all time on my anime list, only behind the revered Sword Art Online and the untouchable legend that is Pingu in the City, even if you haven't seen it, odds are you've at least heard about it. Believe it or not, I was actually among one of these few who hadn't seen the series up until a few days ago. And despite the high acclaim, I tried to enter it with zero expectations, as I knew anticipating too much would likely end in disappointment. However, its high praise wasn't something I could ignore for very long, and it stuck around consistently in the back of my mind as I was greeted by inconsistent character writing and quite a few plot contrivances. It's not a complete disaster, as there are also a number of merits the show possesses as well, but in the end, it has too many flaws to be considered even close to a masterpiece. Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage, and this is my review for Boku no Pico. Boku no Pico is the first entry into the Pico trilogy of OVAs, originally released back in 2006, and stars our titular protagonist Pico as he begins growing closer to a man he meets by chance named Tomatsu, nicknamed Mokun. The story focuses on the budding forbidden love between these two, and explores themes of sexuality and desire, both of which the show goes to, let's just say extreme lengths to convey. My biggest issue with the series lies in its execution of this premise. Any quality romance series will spend the bulk of its run connecting us to its characters and letting us understand the chemistry between them so we can become personally attached to the idea of their relationship. In comparison, with a measly 34 minutes to work with, Boku no Pico ignores this step completely, and after a walk and some ice cream, Mokun is already giving Pico a handjob. And don't even try reading the manga, where even that semblance of build-up is reduced to a single page. I'm not sure whether to blame this on the original artistic vision, or the studio condemning Pico to a pitiful OVA, but either way, the story and the characters suffer as a result, and having been released over a decade ago, I think we can write off any possibility of a full one-core series adaptation. The consequences of rushing this relationship don't make themselves apparent until later on in the episode, however. Mokun and Pico are still more or less likable and relatable characters. I mean, who can't identify with Mokun dressing a little boy in a dress just to fuck him? What am I doing with my life? So it wouldn't be as big of a problem if the series wasn't hinged on actually caring about their relationship. The issue starts sprouting up near the end during some admittedly well-executed character drama when Pico asks Mokun what he really means to him. This is supposed to be one of the emotional climaxes of the episode. The voice acting, music, and direction all convey the gravity of the situation perfectly. Pico running away in anguish as Mokun desperately tries to chase after him, or the beautiful symbolism behind Pico cutting his hair, leaving who he was in the past behind. But in the end, I just don't care, because the show hasn't made me care. I know this series has its massive fan base, so I'd really like to hear from someone about what made them form an attachment to this relationship in such a short amount of time, because I personally just can't. Unfortunately, the problems don't stop there, and we can actually connect another one of my biggest issues to the scene I just mentioned. When Mokun fails to tell Pico what he is to him and Pico runs off, this is a pivotal moment in both of their character arcs. And while it didn't resonate with me, I'm sure it resonated with many others. It's an absolute travesty then that in the very next scene when Mokun finds Pico, this conflict is forgotten about altogether. Pico says nothing about it, Mokun says nothing about it, and they move on with their lives. It cannot be understated how unsatisfying this is as a viewer, and there are many elements throughout that, while not as offensive, still leave a lot to be desired in terms of concluding plot threads and writing consistent characters. Another such example of this is when Mokun shows the dress that he bought for Pico to wear, in which Pico is hesitant and objects by saying that he's a boy. Yet in spite of this, we've seen Pico wear nothing but effeminate clothing the entire OVA. Either this aspect of his character was poorly written, or Pico is a fucking hypocrite. Looking at Boku no Pico on a superficial level, it's a mixed bag. For some reason, despite being as popular and beloved as it is, I couldn't find any decent quality files for it. But even taking the quality of the files into consideration and looking past that, the production values are still not very high. for the most part. A large portion of the series exhibits stiff animation, a horrible color palette, and generally unappealing character designs, resembling what you would expect from a series of this type in the mid-2000s. All of this is surprising considering OVAs usually boast higher budgets and animation quality than what series that air on television do. But there is a very good reason for why Boku no Pico's production value is not exceptional for a large amount of its runtime, and I will bring this up later. The soundtrack, however, is a different story. While I certainly wouldn't say that it's anything spectacular, its pleasantness and ethereal nature do a good job of enrapturing you in the lives of these two people, and when the intensity of a scene ramps up, the music knows when to change tone or even cut out completely. So everything I've mentioned so far has either been mixed or flat out negative. Where does this show get the level of praise and adoration that it does? Well, it's here where I'd like to introduce and coin what I suspect to be the main perpetrator of this. I like to call it the finale effect. Over my experiences with anime, for every popular and highly regarded series that I didn't wind up enjoying as much as the populace, I've found that a large majority of them indicated signs of the finale effect. That is, to have an amazing finale. Chances are that if you have an amazing final episode, or even better, if you have an amazing final chunk of your series, many casual watchers will be intoxicated off of the initial hype they have after finishing, forgetting or willing to forget many of the show's overarching issues because of how it made them feel by the end. This is exactly what's demonstrated in Boku no Pico, because while the finale effect only applies to the final few minutes in this case, those final few minutes are among the best minutes I've spent watching anime in my entire existence. To understand the impact of these final few minutes, I need to give some context here. Throughout the OVA, besides Pico and Mokun, the only other character made aware to us is Pico's grandfather. Let's just call him Oji-san. Oji-san plays a key role at the beginning of the story, telling Mokun to keep Pico company since he doesn't have any friends. But other than this one interaction, his involvement in the story is kept to one as a background character. An observer, if you will. It's only near the end of the narrative when Oji-san reveals his true identity as the Lord of Demons, Zarganal the Wicked, whose true goal was to bring Pico and Mokun together in order for Pico to give birth to the next Demon Lord, of whom the seed can only be placed inside another human male, in this case Mokun, who must plant it into a spawn of the Demon Lord, in this case Pico. Despite the writing being relatively weak as a whole, this plot reveal was brilliantly foreshadowed during the few times that Pico and Mokun had sexual intercourse, in which Pico remarks on Mokun putting his Ochinchin inside of him. At first I paid this line no mind along with Mokun, dismissing it as the ramblings of a child, but the more that it popped up, the more unsettled I became. So I did a little bit of digging and discovered that Ochinchin was actually a term used in ancient Japanese culture to refer to a demon, or a harbinger of death. And that's when everything came together. It's only after this reveal that we learn of what's truly at stake. If Mokun plants the seed of the next Demon Lord inside of Pico, he will die. This creates an incredibly engaging ultimatum for Pico: the life of the one that he loves, or the survival of demon kind. In the end, we know that he chooses Mokun, and it's this that creates a rift between him and Zarganal, who's willing to do absolutely anything he deems necessary to ensure the survival of his race. The following battle that ensues between Pico and Zarganal is among the greatest anime fights I've ever seen, making use of an incredible orchestral score, stellar direction and action storyboarding, and above all, a Sakuga feast of animation that puts the likes of Yutaka Nakamura, Yoshimichi Kameda, and Norio Matsumoto to shame. Now it should be apparent why I excused the generally lackluster production value of the series earlier in the review. In an interview, director Katsuyoshi Yatabe expressed his desire to deliver one of the most well-executed fights in anime history, surpassing even Nakamura's crown jewel that is the final fight in Sword of the Stranger, and that he was willing to go to any lengths necessary to attain that goal, even if he had to indeed pour 99% of the budget and resources into what was essentially 150 seconds of runtime. Yatabe was a madman, and I can respect him for that. that, because he created one of the greatest finales in the animation medium. However, there has to be a moment where we look back at the series and ask, what about the rest? And this is the heart of why the finale effect is a blight on the anime community. Because we rate shows unfairly based on what stuck with us, failing to take into account what didn't stick with us. Having Pico and Mokun deliver the final deadly blow on Zarganol through an incredible shot of them climaxing together in the moonlight is an amazing moment, and one that will stick with me for years. But can I really reflect on the OVA itself with as much love and passion? The same OVA that was riddled with mostly poor character writing, contrived narrative building, and generally mediocre production quality, all for the sake of a phenomenal last few minutes? The answer is no, I cannot. Boku no Pico earns a 4 out of 10.